Hi there, and welcome to Steps Together, the Steps for Development podcast, where we come together to learn and build our own skills to help the children in our lives thrive and succeed. I'm your host, Deb Johnson, and I'm so glad you're here. Whether you're a parent, an educator, a child care provider, or a healthcare professional, no matter what your role is in a child's life, you've come to the right place to learn about development and kids who are differently wired. Here, you'll learn about the whys behind challenging and baffling behaviors. You'll learn practical strategies that really work and make a difference. And you'll learn how to advocate and support all children as you become empowered with tools and skills that bring lasting change. If you are anything like me, you have spent a lot of time searching the internet, heading to social media, and looking for answers. You have faced a situation with a child that is just beyond baffling and challenging, and you're really feeling desperate. You're like, I have tried everything and nothing I'm doing is working. So it's really normal and expected. You're searching for those answers. And so you go to people that have had similar experiences. I've done the same thing. I have a child now, a young adult, who, when they were a preschooler, maybe late toddlerhood, early preschool, started exhibiting just these extreme meltdowns and outbursts and increased rigidity and just this inflexibility in thinking. They became super intense emotionally, started displaying all kinds of sensory sensitivities, and it was very confusing for me as a parent, even with my experience as an occupational therapist. And I started looking for answers. I started searching what is going on here. And I was asking, what is wrong with my child? And that led me down this path of really pathologizing, identifying all the behaviors as being bad things that were part of a huge problem that needed to be fixed. And what I found personally was that I was missing a huge piece. As I searched for answers and got information and learned more about my child, I discovered all these strengths in their capacities and these skills that I was not paying attention to because I was overwhelmed by all the things that I was perceiving as these negative behaviors. And I learned personally that when I focused on the strengths and when I started to say, this is how my child is wired, this is what they need, this is what motivates them, and this is what really helps them to thrive, I started seeing the strategies that would work. And I started understanding why some strategies didn't work. Um, Essentially, it was because some of the strategies I was choosing went against this child as a person, right? It rubbed them the wrong way. And, you know, this child is very strong-willed. And so when I used strategies that were more authoritarian in nature, they did not work. They backfired on me. And that was really challenging. But as I learned about strong-willed children and I applied that to my own children, then I could start to choose more appropriate strategies. And that's what I really want to talk about today. It's why do good tools, right? Things that we know work, like picture schedules and checklists, or different kinds of language structure, first, then, or consequences, or sticker charts and reward systems. Why do some of those things that work with some children not work with other kids? Why do we get stuck using tools that just are not effective. And again, I'm assuming that all of you are experiencing similar concerns where you see a child, you look at the behavior, you search the internet, you're Googling 9-year-old never sits still, 6-year-old still having tantrums. Maybe you're maybe you're Googling out of body meltdowns. That's I think a popular term. And you're getting all kinds of information. The internet is filled with ideas and strategies, all kinds of blogs and articles that are going to tell you, hey, try this, do this. And so you implement it and it doesn't work for your child. So you're feeling very stuck and you're feeling overwhelmed. And if you're like me, it starts to really chip away at your self-confidence, right? Because you start to think, gosh, I'm failing as a parent. Nothing I'm doing is working and I don't know why. That's what I'm here to talk about today. Reframing that to know that it isn't a failure. I like to think of those failures, right? Those mistakes as learning tools, learning opportunities. There are chances for you to say, okay, this didn't work. I need to reset. I need to go back. I need to figure something different in order to find the right tool, implement the right tool, use the right tool at the right time. And honestly, what this is about is not building your toolbox. It's not putting more strategies into your toolbox. It's about having the knowledge base about your child and about tools and strategies to be able to make better decisions so that you're not doing what I call throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks. So many times that's what I see. We see a behavior, sometimes one that's very, very challenging, and we are driven to just stop the behavior. So we throw anything and everything at the child in an effort to stop the behavior. But we're not choosing a strategy intentionally and with purpose. And that's what I want to teach you today is I want to get you started down that road of being able to choose the tools out of your toolbox that are going to work in the moment with your child. So let's expand on why your strategies are not working. I mentioned it's because when we're under stress, we want a quick fix, right? That's probably the number one reason your strategies aren't working. It's because you're just stressed and you want something to stop the behavior. The second reason it might fail is because you don't know your child well enough. And it's that piece of digging deeper to know your child that's going to allow you to select more appropriate tools. I look at this the way, that with that analogy, that saying, the way I phrase this is it's similar to the analogy of give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach him to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. So that's my strategy with Steps for Development. I want to essentially teach you how to fish. I don't want to just tell you, do this sensory activity and it's going to fix things. I want to be able to teach you how to assess the situation and make the selection for the right tool in that moment. Again, using your child's needs and strengths as a guideline. So I want to share with you an example, something that I come across a lot. And I think this will really illustrate for you the challenge that comes when you only look at surface behavior. This is a common thing when I attend IEP meetings as a clinical therapist, trying to support the child in the school setting. I'll go to a meeting and a common complaint is They never sit still, right? And I see this so many times with so many different children. So I'm going to give you the examples of 3 different kids where the IEP team is saying, the special needs team is saying, this kid doesn't just never sit still. So in the first instance, we'll call this child Adam. In Adam's meeting, the discussion is about never sitting still, constantly moving. And the team goes down this road of, oh, he is craving movement. So we want to regulate him by supporting him in his need for movement. So they implement a strategy of a sensory break, a movement break. Very good strategy, very sound tool that works a lot of the time. And in this instance, they implement the strategy. Adam goes out, maybe goes to the playground or the sensory room, and he gets his wiggles out and he meets his threshold, and everything is right with the world. And Adam is well regulated, comes back to the classroom, sits in his chair, and he's ready to learn. Now we have another meeting, and we'll call this child Ben. Ben looks a lot like Adam. In fact, Ben is in the same class as Adam. And Ben really, on the surface, looks exactly the same as Adam. He is constantly moving, fidgeting, wiggling, all over the room. So when we have Ben's meeting, the team says, hey, let's give Ben a sensory break. He seems to need the movement. So we do that. We give Ben a movement break. Ben goes out, he goes to the sensory room, or he's out on the playground, and he's doing whatever he feels driven to do because that's what the team believes he needs. The problem is when it's time to go in, Ben refuses to go in. Ben is not well regulated. Ben is actually now more escalated. He's screaming and yelling, and he's refusing to end his sensory break. He's maybe throwing things. If they get him back into the room, he's refusing to sit. He's becoming aggressive. Something is significantly different here. What's going on? Well, the difference is in the underlying reason for the behavior. Before I dig into that, though, I want to give you the third example. Same classroom, third child. We'll call this child Chris. Chris looks the same as Adam and Ben. Chris is up and moving, fidgeting, sometimes falling out of his chair because he's wiggling so much. He gets up and he walks to the back of the room. He's wandering all over. When the teacher is trying to teach, he's getting up and walking back to stand next to the kid that's answering the question. Again, just everywhere. So in Chris's meeting, the team says, let's give Chris a movement break. Makes sense, right? On the surface, because he looks the same as Adam and Ben. So we give Chris a movement break, and Chris goes out and comes back to the classroom. And he is not well regulated. He's quiet, but that doesn't necessarily mean well regulated, because now when the teacher looks over, Chris is not paying attention. He's not doing his work. He's got his head on his desk and he's falling asleep. And when she tries to rouse him, he doesn't want to wake up. He's acting really lethargic, and maybe he's even still occasionally wiggling, but now he's literally falling onto the floor out of his chair. 3 children, 3 similar presentations on the surface, 3 completely different responses to the exact same strategy. What is going on here? The answer is really simple. It's because Adam, Ben, and Chris all have different needs. And all the team did was look at the surface behaviors, and they didn't assess or question what is the need driving the behavior. So let me tell you what I think was happening in these situations. Adam who responded really well to that strategy has a typically developing nervous system, and he has a high threshold for movement. He's a kid that likes to move. He needs to move. He uses movement to regulate his body. Everybody isn't like that because we are all on this continuum of how much movement we need. But Adam is a kid that does need more movement. And the great thing is his system is typically responding. So when we let him get his wiggles out, he actually does meet a neurological threshold. He feels better. He feels more organized. He comes back to the classroom and he's ready to learn. Perfect. But what happened with Ben? Ben is our kid who came back escalated, worse than before, more aggressive, more dysregulated all over the place. Now, my guess is that with Ben, his nervous system is not typically developing. He is not moving because he needs more movement to meet a threshold. He's moving because his system doesn't organize and regulate movement. He gets more disorganized with the more movement that he gets. So he might crave movement. He might look like he needs more movement. The problem is his nervous system doesn't regulate the input appropriately, and it creates more dysregulation. What does he actually need? He probably needs sensory input through a different system in order to be calming and regulating. So while movement is dysregulating for Ben, maybe what we really need to try is something like deep pressure. We call this proprioceptive input. Maybe he needed slow, heavy work, or he needed more controlled movement activities, like slow rhythmic movement, like rocking, something that is not just free play where we think he's going to meet his own threshold, because that just isn't going to happen. And then what happened with Chris? Chris is our third kid, and same symptom, same presentation. But Chris, remember, came back and put his head down and fell asleep. Why did the movement have that response? Well, again, in my opinion as an occupational therapist, looking at him from a sensory integrative perspective, Chris probably has a nervous system that doesn't need vestibular and activity. What it needs is stimulation through a different system, because he actually has a postural disorder, which is characterized by low muscle tone and fatigue and low endurance. His muscles want and need to move because they're not very stable or steady. He doesn't have the strength or what we call the muscle tone. And that's a little complicated to get into for this episode, but essentially what it means is he's moving because his muscles can't maintain stability when they're sitting still. It's kind of what it boils down to. So you give him movement, and what you do is you exhaust him. You tire his muscles. You don't meet a threshold. There's no threshold there that needs to be met. So we inadvertently pooped him out, and he came back dysregulated in the sense, if you're familiar with zones of regulation, we would say he went from maybe the yellow zone, he went all the way down to the blue zone, and now he's just falling asleep. So each of these children actually needed a very different strategy, right? They each needed something very different. And without digging deeper into the why, we can't apply the correct strategy. We're going to get it wrong. And we're going to get it wrong maybe more often than we get it right. Is a strategy just tossed at a child maybe going to work? Sure, it might, right? You might be able to give a kid a fidget and see some positive change without really knowing the why behind the behavior or the why the fidget worked. The problem is it isn't going to be consistent, and you're still, I think, failing to learn how to fish. So let's do that. Let's learn how to fish. Let's get to know the kids much, much better. And yeah, let's learn how to help them in a more consistent, intentional, and purposeful way. So how do we do that? Step one is to really know their strengths and challenges. With the Steps for Development approach, we create a profile that includes a list of strengths and challenges. And this list is going to be dynamic. It's going to be changing and evolving. Your child's strengths today are going to look very different from what their strengths were 6 months ago and what their strengths are going to be in 6 months, because your child is learning and growing and changing. Same thing with challenges. Things that were challenges 6 months ago may not be a challenge now because they've grown, they've learned, they've changed and developed. So these lists have to be very dynamic. Step two is to identify their needs, looking at the challenges. We want to identify what are the skills we need to be teaching? What are the developmental areas that need to be supported? Step three is to match the strategies to those needs, right? We want to make sure that the strategy we're using is in fact supporting their needs. And step four is that the strategies incorporate their strengths. So we want to pull on their strengths, which include their skills and abilities, their passions, obsessions, and interests. These are things that are going to support the implementation of the strategy. Nothing is more frustrating than trying to give a kid a tool or use a tool with a child, and the child is just outright refusing to cooperate with that tool or that strategy. It's implementing their strengths, it's layering their interests and the things that motivate them onto the strategy that makes it more effective. And then step five is that through this whole process, I'm going to empower you to do what I call think like a therapist. You're not going to just trial and error, throw that spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks. You're going to problem solve with intention and purpose. You're going to create a hypothesis, not a random guess. You're not going to just randomly pull from your past experience or what somebody on the internet told you. You're going to really look at your child's skills, look at their strengths, look at their challenges, review what's in your toolbox, maybe search for new tools, and then you're going to establish at least one hypothesis that's rooted in this sound reasoning, that this makes sense to use this strategy. You're going to be able to say, this is my child's need. These are their strengths that I'm using with this tool. This is what I think is going on underlying the behavior. So this tool makes sense. Now, once you do that process, there is a trial and error process there, right? There's a trial and error time where you're going to trial the strategy based on that reasoning. And you might see that it doesn't work. That's the scientific method, right? We develop a hypothesis, we test it, and then if it doesn't work, we tweak it. So we're always learning. And I do think that's a piece that we often forget. So for example, if you give a kid a fidget while they're doing their homework and the fidget doesn't work in the moment, we pitch it and we say, okay, fidgets don't work. But we fail to really look back in hindsight and say, well, why did the fidget not work in that moment? Could it work in other moments? Essentially, you're looking for what went wrong, right? You're going to analyze it and learn from that experience. That's going to give you valuable information for when you want to use the fidget, right? When could you use that fidget again? Now, the payoff for using this Steps for Development method is that you're going to find that your strategies are more effective, that you feel less stressed because you've got more confidence that you are actually using tools that are more likely to succeed. So it reduces your stress, and that improves co-regulation with your child. Because in the moment when you're trying to use a strategy, chances are really good that your stress is elevated. So one of the things that hurts or harms the success rate of the strategy use is your own stress level, which the child is probably picking up on. And you are also going to learn how to be a better advocate for your child, because now you have some language. You can say, these are my child's strengths. These are their challenges. This is the skill I'm trying to teach my child. This is how that strategy actually teaches that skill. So we've come to the part where I'm going to challenge you for action. I'm going to make this challenge for you with what I want you to do. Pick a child. If it's your child that you're raising, if it's your child you're working with, a child on your caseload, pick that child. And for the next week or so, I want you to start your lists. I want you to list out this child's strengths. Again, their skills, their abilities, their passions, their obsessions, their interests, maybe their personality traits. What are their strengths? And don't forget that sometimes those strengths might seem counterintuitive. I always put strong will under strength, not challenge. Strong will is a strength because we know strong-willed kids like to make decisions. They like to be the leader. They like to help problem solve. They thrive when they're given choices and opportunities. Those are good traits that we can use when we implement a strategy, right? Giving them a choice is a wonderful strategy. Then you want to start listing their challenges. And when I say challenges, what I mean is their skills that are lagging behind. What skills do you need to teach them? And I don't want you to just say that they're clumsy. I want you to say that we need to support them in developing their balance. Be as specific as you can. I don't just want you to say that their challenge is that they're always distracted. I want you to say that we need to focus on teaching them skills of sustained attention. How do we help them focus on a task? We need to expand that skill. Now, challenges might come from your observations, the things that you see in your child. They might also, excuse me, they might also come from stress, or I'm sorry, from assessments. What kinds of impairments, or sometimes professionals will call them deficits. But again, I like to use the word challenge. And so you want to list things like maybe they have a language processing disorder. Maybe they have known diagnoses of ADHD or autism. Maybe we know that they have executive function challenges. Whatever the impairment might be that you've learned from speech evaluation, an occupational therapy assessment, maybe a neuropsych eval, different tools that you might have access to that can help you expand that list of challenges. And then the third list that I want you to start creating is a list of all the tools that you've tried, tools that you're aware of, maybe things that you've tried that haven't been successful, as well as all those that have been successful, and also things that you've learned about and you haven't yet tried. So I'm sure you've got a list of those kinds of things. Maybe it's something like a picture schedule, and you've heard a lot about picture schedules or checklists, but you've never implemented it with your child because you didn't either know how to implement it or you don't know whether it'll work or not. When you have those three lists, I want you to take a look at the last one, the strategies. Pick a strategy. and then compare it. Compare that one tool to your child's strengths and challenges and reflect on whether it seems to fit. Does it first support one of their needs? Does that strategy help them learn a skill? And then second, does it pull on their strengths? Or how can you help it to pull on their strengths? It's this reflection, it's this thinking it through that really helps us pick the right tool. So let me give you 3 quick examples before we wrap up. So let's say that your child's strength is visual processing. They're very driven visually. And we know that from both observing the child and their assessments, the evaluations they've had. We also know that their language is delayed. Their language processing is a challenge. And one of the tools we've thought about using is picture schedules. So let's think about it. Does that fit? I would say yes, because a visual prompt, a visual cue is absolutely appropriate when a child's language is the challenge. When the language is an issue, you want to use way more visual supports. And those visual supports could be something as complex as a lengthy picture schedule, something with, laminated pictures on a Velcro board, or it could be something as simple as bringing out of the cabinet the 2 snacks that you want to offer as choice. Because if you say, do you want an apple or a banana, they can't process that language. But if you hold an apple and a banana, then they can make the choice, right? Do you see how that logically flows? If your child has attention problems, and maybe it's an attention issue, they're highly distracted, and language problems, but you want or need to get their attention, maybe the tool that is going to work best is going to be getting close to them and using a quieter voice. That's a tool I use a lot to get connection. And it works really, really well with a child who isn't attending to all the information, isn't able to selectively attend. So a really good example is a child in a classroom when the teacher calls their name from across the room. If that child, in terms of auditory processing, can't filter out the teacher's voice and selectively attend to the teacher's voice in the busyness of the classroom, all the other sounds in the classroom, then the tool that makes sense is for the teacher to get close to the child, preferably eye level with the child. So I call that proximity. And then to change their voice, change the volume of their voice. A lot of times a whisper is effective. And maybe even adding on a tactile cue if the child is accepting of that, to say, for example, touch their hand or their shoulder. And then another good example would be using this tool of empathic listening. So that's where you connect with the child and you do what I call lean in to agree with them. So looking at your child's strengths and challenges, if your child has a strength of being a strong-willed child, and the challenge is for regulation of intense emotions, this strategy of empathic listening is almost always a win-win because you get close to the child and you lean in and you agree with them. This child might be demanding and might be very frustrated and angry. And by connecting and co-regulating through empathic listening, you've chosen a strategy that gets connection first, right? You agree with them. Oh, I see that you want to go outside and play right now. Oh, I wish I could give you those cookies, right? You're agreeing with what it is they want, and you're getting their attention so that then you can move on to redirect. All right, so those are 3 examples, and we could go on and on, but it's time to wrap this episode up. So in closing, what I want to say is, Learn to think like a therapist. It's easier than you think. I can help you learn how to assess and analyze, get to know your child. This process of identifying strengths and challenges and learning what skills it is they need, it isn't it isn't really all that hard, and you can do it. And when you do it, you're going to feel so much more confident and empowered. You're going to feel more success with the strategies that you use. You're going to find that your ability to implement the strategies goes through the roof. You're just able to really be successful and find that calm and find that peace. So stay with me. There will be more. I'll go deeper into different strategies and future episodes. I'm really, really glad that you joined me today. And if you like what you're hearing on this podcast, please share the podcast episodes. Encourage others to join us in learning how to help the kids we love to succeed and grow stronger and thrive. You can follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. You can find links to sign up for my newsletter there. Stay informed in all the things that are coming down the road. And you can also use those platforms to connect with me. If you're looking for more one-on-one support, I'd love to connect and talk about how coaching might help you. And if you have topics, ideas, things that you want me to explore on these podcast episodes, please drop me a message. Let me know. I would really love to connect and hear from you. And if you're following these podcasts and you're getting some success, please share those successes as well. So thanks again for joining me today. Bye for now.